Hello and welcome back to Something Z, and welcome to What If Naruto Had the Four Tails Part 3. Last time on the What If, Team 7 finished the Land of Waves mission with it ending as a success, because Gato died and his men either ran away or died as well. For example, Haku and Zabuza. Then after Team 7 got back to the Leaf, they began to train for the upcoming Chunin exams, with Naruto learning how to hone in on the Four Tails chakra, and both using earth and fire jutsus. Then after a week of training, the exams began. But right before it began, both Naruto and Sasuke fought Lee, but they both lost after a couple minutes of fighting. Then after the fight, they took the exams, with Team 7 passing the first phase. Okay, so now that's out of the way, let's jump into the video in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so we begin this what if right after the last one ended. But right before the examinees could celebrate, a window in the room breaks, shooting out glass in multiple directions. And because it made a loud noise after breaking, all the examinees turned their heads. And when they did, they saw a woman who told them that she was their next main examiner, and she told them that the next phase will be the next day at the Forest of Death. Then once she was done explaining, she jumped out of the already broken window. Okay, so now we skip to the next day. When Anko believed that all the examinees were there, she began to explain the rules of the exams. But while she was in the middle of explaining the rules, Naruto mocked her. And the second she heard this, she threw a kunai straight at Naruto's face, which he was able to mostly avoid at the last second, with him being able to turn his head. But he wasn't able to move fast enough completely, so he got a cut on his cheeks that was deep enough to draw blood. Then once the kunai hit the floor, Anko began to explain again. Then when she was done explaining the second phase of the Chunin exams, she and the rest of the examiners passed out one of two scrolls to each team. And when they were ready, Team 7 was released into the forest. And after around half an hour, Naruto needed to go pee, so he split off from the group. And a couple minutes later, Naruto came back to the group. But the second Sasuke saw Naruto, he threw a kunai at him, which Naruto was able to jump out of the way just in time. And seeing this, Sakura was confused and she asked why did Sasuke do that. And in response, Sasuke told her to look at Naruto's cheek. And when she did, she realized that Naruto didn't have the cut he got from Anko. So seeing as he was revealed, the Naruto began to laugh, and after a couple seconds, he got surrounded by smoke. And when the smoke dissipated, the Naruto's true identity was revealed, revealing it to be an enemy shinobi from the Hidden Rain. Then once the enemy shinobi was revealed, they and Sasuke began to fight, with Sasuke having the upper hand because of the help of the Sharingan. And after a couple minutes of the two fighting, the real Naruto appears on top of a tree. And seeing the fight from above, Naruto jumped down. And when he was falling, Naruto was shooting out fireballs aimed at the enemy shinobi, which he was able to avoid and get out of the way of. And seeing that he must leave, he began to make clones, with there now being 4 versions of the enemy shinobi. Then once the clones were fully formed, they began to fight the two, with the original enemy shinobi hiding in between the 3 clones. But because they didn't want to reveal the secret, they focused on avoiding all of Naruto and Sasuke's attacks. And while the 5 were fighting, the real version of the Rain shinobi sank into the ground. Then once the enemy shinobi was completely underground, the enemy shinobi undid all the clones that he made, making it so there was only Team 7. And seeing this, Team 7 began to look around for the enemy shinobi, but after a couple minutes they decided that they were long gone, and that they wouldn't be able to find them again. Then once they decided this, they stopped, and they began to think of what they should do next. And after a bit of time, they were able to come up with a long password, so it would be easy to identify who was the real versions of who. But right after they came up with the code, a strong gust of wind appeared, which blew the 3 away, with Naruto getting flung the farthest, with the 2 still somewhat in the same area, but still separated. And after a couple minutes, Sakura and Sasuke were able to find each other. And when they met, Sasuke pulled out a kunai, and he asked for the password. And when Sakura gave the password correctly, he put the kunai down. And they began to think of a plan for when Naruto came back. And after a couple minutes, Naruto appeared on top of a tree branch above them. And when Naruto jumped down to face them, Sasuke asked for the password. And in response, Naruto gave the password without any problems. And hearing this, Sasuke threw his kunai straight at Naruto. And seeing this, Naruto was able to dodge at the very last second by jumping out of the way. And when Naruto landed, he smiled and he asked how did he know he was a fake. And hearing this, Sasuke told him that Naruto would never have remembered such a long password, so he must be a fake. And seeing that he was revealed, the Naruto got engulfed in smoke, and when the smoke was gone, the Naruto's identity was revealed, revealing it to be a shinobi from the hidden grass. Okay, so now we jump to Naruto, and when he landed on top of a tree in a daze. Because not only did he get launched a far distance away at a fast pace, but he also hit multiple trees while he was flying, so that kinda stunned Naruto a bit. And while Naruto was trying to reorient himself, a giant snake appeared behind him, and it began to slither towards him. Then before Naruto was able to react, the snake opened its mouth and it was able to swallow Naruto whole in one gulp. Then after Naruto was in the snake's stomach, he was able to realize that he was in a stomach and getting slowly digested. So Naruto then began to take in a giant mouthful of air. Then he shot out a flaming boulder towards the end of the snake, which began to burn the snake from the inside out. But seeing that that wasn't enough, Naruto shot out 2 more with his limited air. And luckily after the 3rd shot, it was both powerful enough, and the snake's skin was weak from the other 2 shots, that the boulder was able to shoot out of the snake, making a hole. And seeing this, Naruto climbed out of the hole. And when he was out, Naruto began to breathe, with him now breathing fresh air. But just because Naruto was able to escape from the snake, that doesn't mean that the snake was dead. So with its remaining energy from it beginning to bleed out, it it began to try to go towards Naruto again to try to eat him again. But before the snake was able to get to Naruto, Naruto made around 20 shadow clones, which all began to fire out fireballs. And whenever the snake tried to hit any of the clones would just jump out of the way, and they would continue to fire out fireballs. And after a couple minutes, the Narutos were able to do enough damage to the snake to kill it, with there being burn marks across the whole snake. Then once the snake closed its eyes, Naruto undid the clones, making it so only the original Naruto was left. Then after the clones were gone, Naruto realized that he should get back to his team, so he began to run back. And he went as fast as he could without using the four tails' chakra, because he wanted to reserve the tailed beast's chakra for emergencies. So now he jumped back to Sasuke, Sakura, and Schwar. And after some fighting, Schwar put up his hand, which made Sasuke stop. And when he stopped, Schwar pulled out a scroll from his bag, and he put it into his mouth. And before Sasuke could even ask a question about what he was doing, Schwar swallowed the scroll whole, which confused both Sasuke and Sakura. Then once Schwar was done swallowing the scroll, Schwar told Sasuke and Sakura that now the only way for them to get the enemy team's scroll is by killing the other team. Then Schwar showed Sasuke and Sakura visions of their death via kunai to both of their heads, with them both instantly dying. Then once the vision was over, the two Genin got paralyzed with fear. Then after a couple minutes of Schwar just watching the two being scared, Schwar pulled out two kunais from his bag. Then he threw kunais at their heads in the exact same way Sasuke and Sakura saw in their visions. But right before the kunais hit, Sasuke was able to pull out a kunai from his bag, and he was able to stab himself in the leg with it. And because he was able to focus on the pain, he was able to move again. So before the kunais hit, he was able to push himself and Sakura out of the way of the kunais, with some sticking to the trees behind them. Then before Schwar could do anything else, Sasuke scooped up Sakura and he ran away into the trees. But after a couple minutes, Sasuke was able to tell that no matter how hard he tried, he wouldn't be able to escape. So Sasuke then put Sakura down onto a branch, and he waited. Then after a couple seconds, Schwar appeared from the shadows of a tree, and he was riding on top of a giant snake. And when Sasuke and Schwar got face to face, Sasuke pulled out the scroll he had, and he began to try to make a deal with Schwar, saying he will give them their scroll right now. In exchange, he will allow him and his teammates to live. But while he was saying the deal, the group heard someone yell from above them, and when they did, they turned their attention up. And when they did, they saw Naruto, who was finally able to get back to the group. And when they actually saw him, they were able to hear what he was saying, and he was yelling, asking why was Sasuke giving up the scroll, and why is he giving up so easily. Then once Naruto was done shouting, Naruto jumped down to the same tree level that Sasuke and Schwar were on. And when he landed, he grabbed the scroll that was in Sasuke's hand, and he put the scroll into his bag behind him. Then once the scroll was secured, Naruto ran at the snake, and while he was running, he was shooting out flaming boulders, with one hitting the snake in the muzzle, making the snake back away in pain. But when Naruto hit the snake, Schwar jumped off of it, and he landed on a nearby tree branch. Then once he landed, he ran towards Naruto, and he began to throw kunais. And seeing this, Naruto jumped out of the way, and it became Schwar just throwing kunais at Naruto, while Naruto tries his best to avoid it, while Naruto tries to shoot fireballs at Schwar. And because Naruto got distracted, and because he underestimated the snake was able to recover and it swung its tail at Naruto, which was a direct hit, which made Naruto get flung a couple of feet into a nearby tree. And seeing that his teammates aren't going to help because they're too scared, Naruto decided that it was an emergency. So when he landed on a branch, he began to tap into the four tails' chakra. And after around 10 seconds, Naruto began to change, with him beginning to glow as if he was a piece of melting metal, with him getting to around a temperature of 400 degrees Fahrenheit. And because of that, the piece of trees that were under him began to get burned, with it leaving black footprints wherever he stepped. Then once Naruto felt like he was powerful enough, he jumped at the snake, and he began to shoot out a mixture of fireballs and flaming boulders that were getting fired at so much force that made the snake get blasted through a couple layers with every couple blasts. And whenever the snake fell through a hole, Naruto would follow after it, with him standing right next to the snake. But after a couple layers, the snake was able to finally get a hit off on Naruto with his tail, making him get launched into a tree. And because he was like a flaming cannonball, he goes into the tree hits, making one of the trees catch on fire. And because the trees are mostly connected, it began to spread, so the whole area the fight is taking place in is beginning to get smoky, and it's getting harder to see. But even with this, the snake was still able to see, and unfortunately, when the snake landed for the final time, it landed right in front of Sasuke. And because it was a couple feet away from Sasuke, it went in for a bite. But before the snake was able to get too close, Naruto appeared in front of Sasuke, and he was able to keep the snake back with the power of the four tails, with him having two kunais in his hands, and he stabbed the snake's snout. And because Naruto was burning up, so was the kunais, making the kunais even have more of an impact. Then once the kunais were secured, Naruto used them as handles, so he used them to somewhat lift the snake and throw it down the tree branch. Then once the snake was falling, Naruto jumped down after it, and when it got to the snake, he began to beat down on the snake, making the two go down layer by layer after every couple punch. And because again Naruto was heated up, there are burn marks from all the punches that Naruto landed. But after around 4 layers, Naruto began to finally give out, because he finally made it to the limit he could hold on to the form. So he began to rapidly go back to his normal temperature, and the more temperature he lost, the more strength he lost as well. And using this to the snake's advantage, the snake was able to wrap Naruto in its tail in a way that he couldn't move. Then the snake brought Naruto closer and closer to Schwar, and when he got into arm's length of Schwar, Schwar put another seal on Naruto, which locked away the four tails of chakra. And because Naruto used so much chakra, and because because he got the tail beast sealed within him, Naruto passed out. And when Naruto passed out, Schwarz saw no more use for Naruto, so he threw him away. And this time, he threw Naruto into where the fire was most spread, so Naruto was about to burn to death with no way to escape. But right before Naruto fell into the flames, Sakura threw a kunai which stuck Naruto to a nearby tree above the flames, keeping him safe. Then Sakura shouts to Sasuke to do something since he hasn't done anything except watch since the fight began. And after some talking, Sasuke got filled with determination and he began to fight Schwarz. And after some time, he used Dragon Fire technique, which hit Schwarz head on, and that made Sasuke believe that he had incinerated him. But when the smoke was gone, Sasuke and Sakura saw Schwarz standing tall as if nothing happened. But when they were able to see them clearer, they saw that Schwarz's face was almost completely melted off. But where Schwarz's face is melted the most, it revealed another face, revealing it to be Orochimaru. Then seeing that he needed to escape, Orochimaru quickly shot out his neck, extending it by a couple feet. And before Sasuke was able to react, Orochimaru was able to latch onto Sasuke's neck, and he was able to bite him. And when he bit him, Orochimaru placed a curse mark. And because of that, Sasuke screamed in pain, and it felt like he was getting drained of the rest of his remaining chakra. Then after a couple seconds, Orochimaru let go and he retracted his neck. Then when Orochimaru's neck was on, he wished Sasuke luck on his future endeavors. Then he jumped into the smoke from the forest fire that was starting to go out. Then once Orochimaru left, Sasuke fell to the ground and he was knocked out the second he hit the floor, leaving Sakura to save Naruto and to take care of his two unconscious teammates. Then after a couple minutes, Sakura was able to drag Naruto and Sasuke to under a tree where the roots were lifted off the ground. And she was using that as a secret hiding spot. And it was even better because it was a nearby place that the flames didn't hit, but there was still smoke in the air, making a sort of smoke screen. And by this point, the fire is only a couple small flames on pieces of tree that are already burned, so it's going to go out soon. And when Sakura laid down her two teammates, she tried to patch them up with the best of her abilities and the supplies she had on hand. So Naruto and Sasuke had wet towels over their heads and they were a bit bandaged up. Then when she was done with this, she began to place traps in the area to make it even harder for people to get to her teammates. Then after she was done placing traps, she began to think about what she and her teammates should do after her teammates woke up. But while she was in her mind thinking, Team Dosu was able to find Sakura. So when they went to where the traps began, they broke through all the traps with ease. And when they were face to face, they challenged Sasuke to a fight. But since Sasuke was knocked out, it was impossible. So they then go to attack Sakura. But before any of their attacks could hit, Lee appeared from behind a bush and he began to fight them. And after a couple minutes of fighting, Lee tried to use the front lotus. But when he landed the attack, it wasn't as strong as he wanted it to be. And the drawback from the attack was too much for him to handle. So when he landed, he was unable to move for a period of time afterward. And taking advantage of this, Team Dosu began to gang up on Lee. And before Lee was able to recover, they injured Lee to the point where he was on the ground unconscious. Then once Lee was on the ground, Team Dosu attacked Sakura again. And after a couple minutes, Sakura got defeated. And she was currently on the ground with Kin holding onto her hair. And while Sakura was stuck, Kin was telling Sakura how weak she is, and how she's a disgrace of a shinobi. But after multiple taunts, Sakura decided that she needed to fight back. So she then grabbed a kunai from her bag, and she used the kunai to cut the hair that Kin was holding, making Kin get launched back from the unexpected lack of weight. Then when Kin fell, Sakura jumped at the person who was standing right in front of her, which was Zaku. And after slashing him a couple times with her kunai, she pins him to the ground. But after some time, Zaku was able to overpower her, and when he did, he began to beat her up, until eventually Sakura began to bleed from her head. And before he was able to land another hit, Team 10 appeared, and they came to help Sakura. So they then began to fight Team Dosu, which did seem to hold them back, but it wasn't enough to defeat them. But before Team Dosu was able to overpower Team 10, Team Guy appeared, and they came to aid and to get revenge for their fallen comrade. So they began to fight Team Dosu as well. But after a couple minutes of fighting, the fight wasn't over. But before it could end, Sasuke woke up with an ominous aura around him, and it was so strong that everyone in the area was able to feel it, making them all stop in their tracks. Then after a couple seconds, Sasuke was able to get to his feet. Then once Sasuke was standing up, he began to look around at the scene around him. And after a couple seconds, he came across Sakura, who was all beaten up and bleeding. And seeing this, Sasuke got serious and he asked who did this. And hearing this, Zaku raised his hand and he said he did it. And once Sasuke saw this, he ran at Zaku and eventually he was able to get behind him. And when he was behind him, he stood on Zaku's back and he began to pull on his arms. And he was originally planning on completely ripping off Zaku's arms, but after some crying and pleading from Sakura, Sasuke stopped and he just dislocated both of Zaku's arms. He then turned his attention to Dosu. But before he was able to get to him, Sakura pleaded for Sasuke to stop. And after some time, the curse mark started to shrink, making Sasuke fall to the ground. And seeing this, Dosu quickly picked up his teammates and ran away. And after some time, all the teams besides Team 7 left the area to find a place to hide. And a couple hours later, Naruto finally woke up, not knowing about what happened when he was knocked out, thus not knowing about the curse mark. Okay, so now we skip a couple days after the confrontation, and the team has migrated far away from where they started because they didn't want to risk Schwarz or the enemy shinobi that attacked them that sank into the ground to attack them again. But while Sasuke was out foraging for food, Sakura and Naruto were having a discussion about foraging the scroll they had in order to make a second scroll. But in order to do this, they would need to open the scroll they had in their possession. And after a couple minutes, the two decided to go through with it, so Naruto unraveled the tape around it, and he began to unravel the scroll. But before he was actually able to get the text, Kabuto appeared, and he shouted for the two to stop. And he began to tell them that there were consequences for opening their scroll. Then once Naruto rewrapped the scroll, Kabuto led the two of them to an enemy team that opened their scroll beforehand. And they were passed out on the ground, and no matter how hard the two tried to wake them up, they wouldn't wake up. And after they were done looking at the team, the three walked back to Team 7's camp. But when they got there, Sasuke just got back from foraging for food, who then began to ask them why was there now another person. Then the two explained the situation that they were in, and they told them about what Kabuto had shown them. And they began to have a discussion about whether or not they should trust him, and whether they should allow him to join them since he lost his team somewhere. And after a couple minutes of discussion, Team 7 decided that it would be okay for Kabuto to stay with them. And after they decided, they began to think of a plan, which was to wait until nightfall to get the other scroll, because that would allow them the chance to take the lost scroll without any confrontation, because the enemy team they take it from could be asleep. So now we skip to that night, and when everything was prepared, they ran around the forest trying to find the team with another scroll. And when everything was prepared, they ran around the forest trying to find a team with the other scroll. But after around half an hour of running around, they kept on seeing the same surroundings, and they eventually figured out that they weren't actually moving. Instead, they were just going in a giant circle multiple times. And seeing this, they stopped to figure out what they should do. But the second they stopped, hordes of people began to appear out of the ground, and they surrounded the group. And when they were completely out of the ground, the group was able to see that they were clones of the enemy shinobi that they fought right after entering the Forest of Death. And seeing this, Team 7 plus Kabuto ran at the clones and they began to fight. But after a couple minutes of fighting, they figured out that the clones were not physical when Naruto punched the clones through the chest and felt nothing but air. So Naruto, seeing this, jumped back and he used the Shadow Clone Jutsu, making around 49 clones, with 3 of them turning into Sasuke, Sakura, and Kabuto. And when the clones were fully formed, they began to fight the other clones. And while the clones were fighting, the originals hid under a tree. And after a couple hours, the enemy team assumed that Team 7 was tired, so they came out of hiding. And when they did, Naruto undid all the clones, and the originals came out of their hiding spot. Then the two groups began to fight, but during the fight, Naruto tried to heat himself up, using the Four Tails' chakra. But when he did, he stayed the same temperature. And while Naruto was trying to heat up, Sasuke tried to use the Fireball Jutsu. But when he tried to mold his chakra, he would feel an intense pain that would cover his entire body, which would make him stop using the jutsu, leaving him open to an attack. But even as the two other teammates weakened, Team 7 and Kabuto were able to win the fight. And once they knocked out the enemy shinobi, they took their scroll. And seeing that they had the scrolls they needed, they began to run towards the center of the forest, where the tower was located. And after a couple minutes of running, they finally got there. And when they did, they split off from Kabuto since his team was there waiting for him. And when Team 7 entered the tower, they were told to open both of the scrolls at the same time in the next room over. So when they went to the next room, they opened their scrolls. And when they did, a poof of smoke came out of the two. And when the smoke cleared, they see Iruka, who then congratulates them for making it so far. And after some talking, he tells them to go into the next room. And when they walk into the next room, they see Team 10, 8, Guy, Dosu, and 2 of the 3 Sand Shinobi asleep, with the only other shinobi awake being the guy with red hair and black circles around his eyes. And that's when we're going to leave the What If. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you next time on Something Z.